The year is 1424. The Forbidden City, Beijing. And somewhere in this building, a list with your name on it is almost finished. The Yongle Emperor is dead. And in the women's quarters, that news did not arrive as grief. It arrived as a countdown. This is not legend. This is not mythology. What happened inside these walls across nearly a century of Ming Dynasty rule is documented in the court records of two governments, and what those records describe will permanently change how you understand what it meant to serve an emperor. Her name was Lady Han, a Korean woman sent to the imperial court as a diplomatic tribute. She had spent years learning to navigate a world governed by rank, ritual, and survival. She understood the system. She had watched it consume others. Now, in the autumn of 1424, she sat motionless in her chamber and listened. Distant bells marked the hour. A brush moved across paper somewhere in the administrative wing, methodical, unhurried. The sound of ink on silk, the sound of a list being completed. Not every woman in the palace would share the emperor's fate. Only those without surviving sons, without rank high enough to matter, without the right patron in the right ministry. But the men writing the list were not her patrons, and the rooms where decisions were made were rooms she had never entered. A eunuch moved through the corridor outside. He paused, consulted his paper, then continued past her door. Not yet. If you want to understand the history they chose not to put on the placard, subscribe and stay with us. To understand what Lady Han was waiting for, you have to go back 56 years to the man who built the cage. In 1368, a peasant named Zhu Yuan clawed his way out of famine and civil war to found the Ming Dynasty, one of the most powerful imperial regimes in human history. He was brilliant, ruthless, and deeply suspicious of anything he could not control. In the early years of his reign, he made a decision that court historians recorded without commentary, and later scholars would struggle to explain. He revived Xunzang. The practice, the ritual sacrifice of living palace women to accompany a dead emperor, had existed in ancient China. It had been condemned by Confucian scholars during the Han and Song periods. It had been largely abandoned. Zhu Yuansong brought it back, codified it, and embedded it inside the founding legal framework of his dynasty, a document called the Huangming Zuxun, the Ancestral Admonitions. This is the first thing to understand. What happened to Lady Han was not the act of one cruel emperor. It was state policy, sustained across 5 reigns, documented in both Chinese imperial records and the diplomatic archives of the Joseon Kingdom of Korea. The Joseon court knew. Contemporary records confirm it. Korean envoys attended Ming imperial funerals. They wrote down what they witnessed. Those documents survive. And here is the fact that reframes everything. The Joseon dynasty kept sending women to the Ming court anyway. Because the alternative, offending the most powerful empire in the known world, was worse. Lady Han had been sent into a system that her own government understood might end her life. No one told her. The imperial harem was not a place of chaos. It was a bureaucracy. And bureaucracies do not commit atrocities, they process them. The Ming court maintained a tiered ranking system for its palace women that governed everything. The food they ate, the fabric of their robes, the size of their chambers, the number of servants permitted to attend them. Each rank had a name. Each name had a corresponding set of rights. And when the emperor died, that same ranking system, the one that had organized their entire lives, determined who would follow him into death. The legal architecture that made this possible was embedded in the Huangming Zuxun, the ancestral admonitions written by the dynasty's founder. It was not a secret document. It was the foundational law of the empire, consulted by every subsequent emperor as the authoritative guide to correct imperial conduct. Within it, the practice of sacrificial accompaniment was framed not as violence, but as devotion, the highest expression of a concept called Xunzang, a form of loyal fidelity so total it extended beyond the boundary of a life. Here is the chilling architecture of it. Women who died with their emperor received posthumous titles. Their families received state pensions. Shrines were built in their honor. The Ming court had engineered a system in which a woman's destruction could be formally reclassified as her greatest achievement, and the state would pay her relatives to agree. Every death was recorded, every woman named. The registries exist. Somewhere in those documents, written in the careful hand of a court scribe, is a line that reads, "She was prepared, and she complied." The morning before the ritual, those on the list were served a formal meal. This detail comes directly from eyewitness accounts preserved in the Joseon royal records, written by Korean court officials who were present, who watched, and who wrote it down. Lady Han sat at the table. The food was ceremonial. Elaborate. The kind of meal prepared for significant occasions in the palace calendar. No one was eating. She observed the room with the particular attention of a woman who had learnt to read danger through surfaces. Across the table, a young woman from the provinces, barely 17, sent to the capital years ago and never fully understanding why, looked at her food with the expression of someone waiting to be told this was a mistake. It was not a mistake. An older concubine sat near the far wall. She was not on the list. Her rank had spared her. Her face held something that was not relief. It was the expression of a person watching something happen that they will carry for the rest of their lives, and already knowing it. The hierarchy of survival was the same hierarchy that had governed every other day inside this palace. The same tiers of rank that had determined who walked closest to the emperor's procession now determined who walked out of this room. The logic had not changed, only the stakes had finally become visible. When the officials entered, they carried a document. One of them began to read from it aloud. The narration slows here, not to spare you the detail, but because Lady Han herself would have slowed here, in this exact moment, listening for the shape of a syllable she recognized as her own. We do not hear the names, we hear only the paper. What happened inside the Forbidden City was not a secret kept from the outside world. It was a secret kept from us, from the version of history that gets taught, summarized, and placed on museum placards. The governments of the era knew exactly what the Ming court was doing, and the most detailed, surviving evidence does not come from Chinese imperial archives alone. It comes from Korea. The Joseon dynasty maintained meticulous diplomatic records, the Joseon Wangzhou Silok, the veritable records of the Joseon kings, a chronicle so comprehensive that historians still mine it for details absent from Chinese sources. And within those records is something that changes the moral geography of this story entirely. Documentation that Korean envoys attended Ming imperial death rituals, witnessed what occurred, filed reports, and returned home. The Joseon court read those reports. Court officials debated them. And then, in the years that followed, they sent more women. This was not ignorance. This was geopolitical calculation. The Ming Empire was the dominant power in East Asia. Offending it carried consequences that Korean statesmen weighed against the lives of individual women and found the calculation workable. The tribute system, in which Korea periodically sent palace women to the Ming court as diplomatic gifts, was not unique to Korea, but Korea's records are among the most detailed we have, which means Korea's complicity is among the most legible. At least one Korean woman, referenced by name in the Joseon archives, sent correspondence home before she died. The letters were formal, composed. They expressed gratitude for the honor of serving the emperor. They said nothing of fear, nothing of protest, nothing that would have caused difficulty for the officials who read them before they were delivered. Contemporary scholars have noted the particular discipline required to write such a letter. Whether that discipline was genuine acceptance, trained performance, or something that has no clean name in any language, the records do not say. That silence is the most haunting thing in the archive. Now go back to the beginning. The eunuch in the corridor, the paper in his hand, the door he passed without stopping. When we opened this story, that image read as a moment of individual terror. One woman, one door, one reprieve. But that is not what it was. The eunuch was not delivering news. He was conducting an administrative verification. Moving through the women's quarters with a checklist, confirming that every name on the document corresponded to a physical location, a present body, an entry that could be marked complete. This is what the Korean eyewitness accounts describe when reconstructed carefully. Not chaos, not violence erupting from grief, but a procedure. A hall prepared in advance, wooden stools arranged at precise intervals, silken cords, red, the colour of ceremony, the colour these women had worn as markers of rank, positioned and ready, senior eunuchs present in their official capacity, a formal announcement, a sequence of steps that someone had designed, refined, and transmitted to the next generation of administrators who would be required to perform it. The ritual had a protocol. And protocols do not appear fully formed. They are drafted, tested, and improved. What the midpoint of this story demands you sit with is not the violence itself, but the iteration behind it. Someone looked at how this was done the first time and thought about how to do it better. The horror was not in the catastrophe. The horror was in the craft. The emperor did not administer Xunzang himself. He did not need to. Below him existed an entire layer of men whose professional function was to ensure that imperial will become institutional reality, eunuch administrators, ritual officials, court scribes, and it is in their records, not the emperor's edicts, that the true texture of this practice becomes visible. The posthumous honours granted to sacrificed women were not informal gestures. They were processed through the same bureaucratic channels used to manage imperial appointments, land grants, and military promotions. A woman's name would be entered into the registry of the dead. A title would be assigned. A notification would be drafted and dispatched to her family. A pension amount would be calculated and authorized. Multiple officials would review each document before it was sealed. This means that for every woman who died under Xunzang, there exists a paper trail, and that paper trail required the active participation of dozens of men who were not present in the ritual hall, who never held the cord, and who would have described their work, if asked, as record-keeping. There were voices of dissent. This is important because it removes the last available refuge of historical inevitability. Contemporary records preserve the objections of Confucian scholars and court officials who argued against Xunzang, not primarily on the grounds that it was cruel, but on the grounds that it violated the principles of benevolent governance, that it was wasteful, that it dishonoured the Confucian ideal of the state as protector of its people. One official submitted a formal memorial to the emperor arguing for the abolition of the practice. His name is in the archive, his argument is in the archive. The emperor's non-response is in the archive. The death records of the women he was arguing to spare are in the same archive, filed under a different category, cross-referenced by date. He outlived them, he continued his career. His memorial was preserved because the Ming bureaucracy preserved everything, including the evidence of its own refusals. The year is 1435. The Xuande emperor is dying. History remembers him with unusual warmth. He was a painter of genuine talent. His cricket paintings survive and are still exhibited. He was considered a measured ruler, scholarly in temperament, less given to the brutality of some of his predecessors. He reformed tax collection. He reduced certain punishments. He is remembered in the long arc of Ming historiography as one of its more humane emperors. He was also the last emperor under whose death Xunzang was formally performed. Korean envoys were present at his court in 1435. Their accounts entered the Joseon records. What they described followed the same procedure documented a decade earlier at the death of the Yongle emperor, the same structure, the same sequence, the same administrative composure surrounding it. The protocol had not changed. If anything, contemporary accounts suggest it had become more practiced. Somewhere in the supply records for the imperial household in 1435, there is an inventory entry for red silk cord. Not decorative. Not ceremonial in the way a banner or a robe is ceremonial. Listed as a functional supply item, ordered in the quantity required, accounted for and signed off on before the emperor drew his final breath. The same red that marked rank. The same red that meant belonging. Ordered in bulk, filed under procurement. The civilization that produced the compass, movable type, and one of the most sophisticated civil examination systems in human history did not sustain this practice despite its sophistication. It sustained it through that sophistication. The bureaucracy was not a safeguard against the horror. The bureaucracy was the mechanism by which the horror ran on time. In 1465, the Chenghua emperor issued an edict abolishing Xunzang. It was recorded in the Ming Shilu, the veritable records, and it is, on its surface, an act of imperial compassion. The edict acknowledged that the practice had caused suffering. It cited the grief of the women involved. It framed its own existence as evidence of a ruler's moral seriousness. What abolition edicts actually are, when read carefully, is confessions. An abolition edict cannot exist without the practice it abolishes. Every word of the Chengwa Emperor's decree is an implicit acknowledgement that what preceded it was real, sustained, and institutionally embedded across nearly a century of dynastic rule. You cannot formally prohibit something that was never formally practiced. The document that ended Xunzang is, in its very existence, the most unambiguous proof that Xunzang happened. But read what the edict does not say. It does not name the women. It does not enumerate them. It does not identify which emperor bears the heaviest responsibility, or calculate what the total cost in human lives amounted to across 5 reigns. It frames the practice as a regrettable custom, now corrected, and moves forward. The dynasty continues, the records are filed. The next item of imperial business is addressed. Within 2 generations, Ming court historians were writing about Xunzang in the past tense, not with horror, but with a particular clinical detachment that accumulates around atrocities once enough time has passed that the people who witnessed them are no longer alive to insist on their weight. It became a historical footnote, a practice of the early Ming, they wrote. A different era. The documented sacrifice count across 5 emperors, drawn from formal registry entries, numbers in the dozens. That figure covers only the women whose names and ranks were high enough to generate official paperwork. It does not account for lower-ranked palace servants, unnamed attendants, or women whose deaths were recorded in documents that did not survive. Scholars have noted that the true number has never been established. It likely cannot be. If this is the history they buried in a footnote, imagine what else hasn't been told. Subscribe, and we will keep finding it. Today, the Forbidden City receives millions of visitors each year. The women's quarters have been carefully restored. The corridors are lit and labelled. There are informational displays describing the hierarchy of the imperial harem, the ranking system, the daily rituals, the elaborate structure of life inside the palace walls. The displays are detailed, accurate, and genuinely informative about many aspects of concubine existence. They do not mention Xunzang. In the Joseon records, those meticulous, surviving foreign government documents that contain some of the most direct eyewitness testimony we have of what occurred, there is an entry for a Korean concubine sacrificed at a Ming imperial death. After her name, after the notation of her fate, there is a single additional line. Her family, back in Korea, received compensation for her death. The compensation took the form of a bolt of silk. The silk was red. It is the last appearance of the motif. Not worn, not used, not tied. Simply sent, a bolt of fabric dispatched to a family in a country that had given their daughter to a court that had given her a title, a shrine, and an entry in a registry that confirmed she had complied. Her name is still in the archive. The silk dissolved long ago into whatever cloth becomes when no one is left to remember what it was given for. What we choose to call history, and what we quietly agree to file somewhere else, that distance is not accidental. It is administered. It always has been.